Hi, everybody. My name is Karen Gallivan. I'm a department chair in sports and health sciences at American Public University System, which is great. Our next presenter is also one of us, part-time faculty here in the sport management program. And Jeremy Evans is a sports lawyer in California, and he's going to talk to us today about AI in practice, what to do and what not to do. That's the question. So, Jeremy?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and appreciate Karen for the wonderful introduction, and wonderful to be with everybody. So, a little bit of background on myself. I'm a sports entertainment lawyer in Southern California, based in Los Angeles and Newport Beach. I'm a transactional lawyer, so I'm deal making and sort of peacemaking between parties and putting deals together. A lot of my clients include the studios and advertising agencies and some talent, and obviously working with on the entertainment and the sports side. So it's a fascinating job. I love what I do. I probably wouldn't practice law unless I was doing this. But one of the big things that's come up in sports and entertainment and beyond in every facet of our lives these days is AI. And specifically generative AI, where you're talking about inputs and outputs and really sort of systems and models thinking like humans do. And these models becoming smarter and smarter every day with the information and data that it collects. And so it's really a fascinating opportunity, I think, which is both scary and exciting. So I'm going to share my screen to pull up the PowerPoint here, and we'll get started. So as Karen mentioned in the beginning, but this is that was the sort of the title of the presentation today. Here's kind of what we're going to go over today. I know we're limited on time. Karen, we can go to what, 10:20, right? I think it's 10:20.
Now we're going to, so for you, 1:10 for us. So 10:10 for you. So 30
Perfect.
minutes.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So this is kind of a survey, what we're going to do today, and we'll get into this. So I talked about all these things before. One thing I wanted to mention was that I recently finished my term as chair of the California Lawyers Association Task Force on Artificial Intelligence, which looked at AI and the practice of law, both in California and beyond, in a comparison. So what we're going to talk about today, some of the ethical rules with regard to the practice of law and AI, understanding what AI can do, and then also learning the landscape with regard to artificial intelligence. So as we kind of take a look at the survey of the artificial intelligence and what it's doing in our communities, on the one hand, AI is great, right? Because if you're watching Netflix or Amazon Prime or something like that, if you listen to Spotify or Pandora, you have these opportunities where it's learning about you and it will show you content that you might like, and it makes life easier. On the other hand, if you're using, let's say, social media, or even in content that you like in any other platform, you're going to tend to see things that you like, right? So that may create a bubble. It may create, you have less opportunity to expand. But that being said, AI is also smart enough to suggest certain things to you. So you notice sometimes you'll be watching a film or listening to music, and then it'll suggest new music to you. And I have to tell you that I always thought I was a big music fan until I got Spotify. And next thing you know, I'm listening to music and artists I didn't even know existed. And it's really great music. And I think that's the power of AI when it's at its best. Um, and then there's also one other thing that I thought was really interesting that happened earlier this year, and it had to do with Hollywood studios. One of the big things that they have a problem with is dubbing certain movies or films into different languages. And this is a thing that they go over in contracts and how it's going to look, how it's going to feel. But one of the things that's great is with AI now, generative AI, they can dub these performances instantly in over 100 languages and dialects and using the accents and the original voices. So imagine watching a soccer game in, Mexico or overseas in Italy or something, and then it's like, but you're listening to it in English, but it's done in the exact same way that a local might hear it. So it's a very fascinating thing. And of course, music labels using AI to create things. We obviously have ChatGPT and a lot of other platforms. But we also live in a time where we have to be careful about this too, because there's always the labor question, right? There's the question of, will it take away jobs? And I think ideally, if AI can be in a place where it serves as an opportunity to expand our thinking or to give us more time and energy to think about things critically, I think we'll be in a good place. But if it takes away from human innovation, if AI becomes more important than humans, I think that's where we create problems. And I think in many ways, Hollywood has done a pretty good job to predict about what that future might look like. If you're thinking about movies like Terminator and Minority Report, these are all things that maybe can be sort of fantastic and sort of maybe crazy, but it's just something to think about. So in terms of state bar rules, most state bars will have your typical duties of confidentiality, of competence and diligence and those things. I won't read it off the screen, but you could see it there. I think sometimes lawyers and even non-lawyer folks who are dealing with legal issues, which is prevalent in sports and entertainment and really across most industries, is that sometimes you think, oh, because it's online or it's digital, these rules don't apply, but they do. And so when you're using a ChatGPT or you're using any other platform you can imagine that deals with generative AI or collection of information, you have to be concerned about confidentiality and privacy. And one way to prevent some issues is to always purchase the paid version of the platform that you're using, because generally the license is going to be more protected. So for example, if using ChatGPT, you want to purchase the paid license because the inputs you put in will be protected. They won't be used by other people. So if you create a trademark or if you create some sort of image or video or content, it won't be used if you have the protected license. But if you use the free platform, it won't be, because ultimately that's how the AI is going to learn, is by the human inputs and outputs and that sort of thing. Of course, with duty of competence and diligence, you have to treat AI much like you would supervise anybody on your team. You have to review the work. And that would be sort of rule number 2 is, number 1 is pay for the license. Number 2 is have human review. And the third piece would be sometimes you need disclosure. Let me give you an example of this. The state of Utah, which I'm not licensed to practice there, I'm licensed to practice in California, but the state bar of Utah has a rule that if you want to use AI in representation with your client in terms of drafting documents, whatever it might be, you actually have to get the client's approval. I think this takes it too far, and I wouldn't be surprised if the state bar changes this rule down the road. The client should not be telling the lawyer what programs to use or what products to use. This would be like a client telling me, Jeremy, you can't use Microsoft Word to draft a contract for me. Now, if there's a compliance issue, if there's an issue where they don't have that certain capability, you make those things, work with your client. But ultimately, the lawyer needs to be able to provide competent legal advice. But sometimes that requires disclosure. It's not required in California, but it might be one of those things where if the client asks you, did you use AI? Yes, but I protected it, that sort of thing. Again, and AI, again, you need the human review. So I think I noted that on there. One other thing too I want to mention is you cannot charge your client for time saved on using AI. and this is probably a good principle across all practice areas, whether you're a lawyer or not, is that you should not be in a situation where you're saying, oh, well, this would normally have taken me, 6 hours, and now I'm gonna, sort of not charge for that, right? Or charge for that, charge my client for that. Now, look, if you tell your client up front that you're using AI and that there's cost to it, and that's disclosed, and clearly the client, can pay for that. But this is an interesting proposition, right? And this is where I think AI will always have an issue with human innovation. And what I mean by that is there was an old story that was told to me about Pablo Picasso, and you may have heard this story where he was painting in France, and somebody came up to him and said, can you draw me a picture of that tree? And so Picasso did it within 20 seconds and was finished with it, and then said, okay, that's $5,000. And of course, the person was shocked. Well, how can you charge me that much? It only took you 20 seconds. And he goes, well, it may have taken me 20 seconds in this time, but it took me 30 years to get to the point to draw that in 30 seconds, 20 seconds, whatever. I think this is the issue with AI, is that on the one hand, it takes intelligence on our part to create the system, and to input things and to think broadly. If anything, I like to think of AI like Jarvis in the Marvel movies with Iron Man, where you're using it as an addition to sort of complement your thinking and processes and to compute information that would take years to compute. But I think, again, this is the issue, is that in some sense, if you're a creative, if you like to write and create things and draw things, there's potential that it can take away from that. And I think that's where things need to be balanced, where you use it as a tool, you use it to help, but not to become reliant on it, and to only use it and to not review it and those sorts of things. The other thing that I want to mention about AI is that there's a lot of things that AI cannot do currently. And I think people need to know about this and some of the issues with it. So generally, AI wants to be right, and it wants to give you an answer. And that's never a good combination, right? So you again, this is why human review is so important in this regard. And sometimes it can give you a biased answer and then tell you something that's incorrect, or come up with an incorrect case or response to something. And of course, as a lawyer or any practitioner, you need to be cognizant of what other rules and responsibilities there are outside of where you're working, or whatever policies your company might have or school might have. And I want to give a little comparison here as to sort of what's going on across the United States, but also what's happening across the world. So in the CLA, California Lawyers Association, the State Bar of California, and other states have done this too, we focused on a sort of comparing what other states are doing. We've looked at different practice areas. We looked at governance issues, and some of the rules that go along with that. I think other states and jurisdictions would be wise to do the same thing. As I mentioned, Utah has this rule where basically the client has to approve of the AI. Again, I think that takes it too far. Europe is trying to become the authority on AI. They're really trying to push this. And I really applaud them for their prioritization of human rights. One of the things that I've called for is this idea that there should really be an AI human bill of rights, meaning that humans should always be at the top of the proverbial food chain, meaning humans should be determining AI, not the other way around. I think the problem in this is that humans are inherently wanting to look for a more efficient route. There's a reason why we use a toaster or a microwave, or why CDs are no longer around, although vinyl is making a comeback. But, these sorts of things where we as humans tend to want to rely on something else or to do something. And I think that inherently is the great thing about AI, but it's also the bad thing. We need to be careful of that. Lastly, President Biden had signed, excuse me, an executive order recently talking about developers and basically there's a rule now that if you're a company and you're developing some sort of powerful AI systems, that you have to share the results and safety test with the US government. This should be no different than if you're flying a new plane and you want to make sure you have all the tests done and you check with the, FAA, that sort of thing, right? You want to make sure that you're in compliance. So that's what that situation is all about. Here are some other issues with AI I wanted to mention, as we've got about 14 or so minutes left. And I'll take a look at the questions if there's any questions that have come in towards the end. So issues of acceptance. Sometimes you're going to run across professionals in the field that don't want to use AI. And that rubs against the fact of rush to adopt, where you have some folks that just want to use it and they love it. You have to be careful of that. Again, I mentioned the AI Bill of Rights. There's obviously copyright and trademark issues in AI. A lot of times when you're looking at ChatGPT, this is pulling information from the internet and what's fed into it to create an answer or solution to something. A lot of that information is copyright protected, trademark protected. And it's similar to, there was a case that happened maybe it was 10 years ago with Google. And sometimes when you Google search something and then Google Books will pop up and it'll show an excerpt from the book. There was a case about that, and ultimately Google was successful. And what the court found was that it was okay for Google to take a piece of it because ultimately it was an opportunity. This is me paraphrasing. It was an opportunity for more business to come out of it. People would buy the book. It'd be no different if you walked into a Barnes and Noble or a bookstore and read the part of the book and then put it back on the shelf or decided to purchase it. This was just a digital version of that. I think ChatGPT takes that a step further though, because it's taking information and creating something with it. So there may be something down the road where you're talking about licensing, and it may be that some of this open source technology becomes more expensive. Again, I mentioned privacy issues. I mentioned prediction bias. I think sometimes too, generative AI can be like Drax in the Marvel films where things are too literal. There was that line where I think Chris Pratt had said something to him like, wow, that joke went over his head, and which is a common saying. And then I think Drax's response was, no, I would catch it. So it's like one of these things where AI is great, but we need to remember human beings are smart and we need to use it as a tool. And the one thing I think where, again, upscaling is a very important thing. So using AI to be more, to automate certain things, for example, I use it in many ways to help me remember things, calendar things, put things together, especially if you're dealing with large amounts of data. It is almost impossible to remember some of that stuff. And if you look at with some of the changes that are happening to bar exam testing across the country, the testing is moving towards less memorization and more practical application. So the test is more related to how will you react in a situation where your ethics are called into question, or there's an ethical issue that you need to look at, or a practical issue, and how are you going to respond to that, versus did you remember the rule against perpetuities or something, right? Again, both are important, but just something to keep in mind. Best practices, I think ultimately we need to treat AI like we do analytics in baseball. You need to have the human element and the human touch to things. AI is great as a tool, but do not become over reliant on it. I don't know if there's any Oakland A's fans in the room, but one of the criticisms the Oakland A's have always received is that they're great at the analytics, they're great at Moneyball, but they haven't been able to get over the hump, right? And this is where the human element and drafting and purchasing free agents and doing these things is going to help. And it's no different than any other practice area, any other ability that folks are in, or job that they're in. Use it as a tool, but establish boundaries and regulations when and where you can use it, when you can't use it. And again, just be informed, learn about these things. I do a lot of, participate in a lot of, seminars, but also in, sampling of some of these products where I get invited in to sort of look at a product, see how it works and see if it be helpful. Sometimes it's not. Okay, so what's next? I think ultimately what we need to be looking at, sorry, I went too little far, and then I'll stop sharing the screen and then I'll move over to some questions, but we need to look at, if you're in any sort of industry of legal or you're looking to use AI in any profession, you probably need to study it, maybe establish a task force, maybe look at the history of AI, how it can work, how it can help you, bring in some experts. When we formed the task force with the California Lawyers Association, I was probably the least smart person on that group, and we had a former chief technology officer with NASA. We had a bunch of litigator attorneys. We had some judge folks involved. I mean, it was a really good group of people, but you really need to have some perspective. And the reality of it is that AI is already here. You just need to be able to prepare for it and protect what you need to protect. I think it's good too to share some of your findings, put things out there. We wrote a 10-page paper on it and came up with some solutions, which I talked about earlier, which were namely, number one, anytime you're using AI, you want to make sure that you purchase the paid version. Number two, you have to have human review of whatever is created. And within that, be cognizant of confidentiality, privacy, that sort of thing, and copyright protection. And then the third is there may be a time where you need disclosure on stuff. You need to disclose to your client or whoever you're working with that you're using AI to do something. Often when I do presentations, I didn't for this one, but sometimes if I'm going to be, or if I'm moderating a panel or something, I might put in a ChatGPT and I'll say, send me 10 questions on what I can ask two lawyers in the movie business on a particular topic. And it'll come up with great questions. And frankly, probably questions I never would have come up with or would have taken me 6 weeks to come up with. So it really is great. Again, avoid the sort of doomsday, not only reaction to AI, but also avoid being taken over by AI in the sense that you become so reliant on it. You need to be in control of what you're looking at and that sort of thing. So as a bonus, sort of looking at if you're in the legal profession, you may be wanting to take education on AI. I know in California, it's required now to be up on technology. Maybe you look at hiring chief compliance officers and chief legal officers to help with AI compliance. And again, as I mentioned earlier, be like Robert Downey Jr. and Iron Man and be like Jarvis, where you're using Jarvis as a tool. Although Jarvis ended up blowing up the world potentially. But so you need to be careful about this stuff. And by the way, I'm not some huge Marvel and Iron Man fan. I just use this as an example because it's sort of focused on entertainment and sports in that regard. Here's my contact info. My website's easy. It's just csllegal.com. Google California sports lawyer, and it'll pop up as well. So I'm going to check the chat here, see if anything's come through.
Hey, Jeremy, that's also interesting. It leads to so many questions. I don't see them in the chat, but I bet people have
Okay.
them. Professor Harmon says you should consider presenting this at SRLA and SLA conferences. So take a note of that. And I do have I had sort of a question. So you stated, and we state this a lot here at APUS and everywhere, I'm sure, AI is a tool, right? Don't become overly reliant on it. Just because everyone's doing it doesn't mean it's either the right thing to do or that we should do it without knowing what we're doing. And therein lies maybe my question. So if somebody's wanting to start a business similar to yours, in sports, they want to be an agent or something, what would be the big caution around, creating a business and all of their promotional materials using AI because it's faster? Because as you know, being faculty as well, students often do a lot of work very quickly and don't check it.
Yeah.
Here, there's
Yeah.
no legal repercussion except potentially if it's really egregious, maybe you're standing here, but
Yeah.
you can take it from there.
Karen, I appreciate that. And that's such a great question. And to me, genuineness is the most important trait in business, right? Genuineness, honesty, loyalty. It's the old adage of, honesty in advertising. And to me, it's not dishonest to use strictly AI, but the thing is it's not necessarily genuine because it's not coming from you. And it's probably not going to help you in some way because maybe it's good for Google results and search engine optimization. But to me, your marketing, your strategy should really come from you. And then you can use these tools to sort of add to it, benefit, change it. It'd be no different if you said, hey, I'm going to draft up a resume and then I'm going to run it through AI to see if I can change some things, change some sentences, change some wording of things I'm not noticing. It's no different than if you click spell check on a Microsoft Word doc. That's AI too. So to me, I think it's all about being genuine and creating a message that's true to you. I do know some lawyers that use AI in everything, their email responses, their calendaring, all those things. That's not something that I do. I truly enjoy the creative aspect of the business, the marketing aspect. In many ways, I enjoy the business of law more than I do the practice of law, right? And that may be different for there's other lawyers that love the writing and they love the being in court and that sort of thing. I'm much more of a small business owner, entrepreneur, want to create something, want to build things. So that part is very personal to me. On the other hand, I get it too, because not everybody is going to be a great marketer. I had to train myself in these things and had to just by trial by error figure it out and sort of jump off the diving board and see what happened. Um, but I will tell you too, as another piece to that, one of the pieces of advice is that I always give to students and practitioners, because believe me, in the entertainment and sports space, the one question I always get, which I'm always happy about, but also sad about, is how did you get into sports and entertainment? That's the career I wanted to have, or a career I want to have. And I always sort of tell folks, follow the path of geography, branding, community. So be where the action is happening, both digitally and physically. Create a brand, establish it, maintain it, and join organizations in your community that will have a direct impact on your career. So as Professor Harmon talked about in the chat, SLA or SRLA or whatever bar association, whatever group you want to be a part of, and not just become a member, but really get involved and become a leader and give back, put together conferences, meet people, that sort of thing. There's nothing better I have found in the practice of law or anything than being a resource for people. People call you to say, hey, do you know somebody in this industry or that does this? It's just a great tool to have. And the last thing I'll say about this is when I was in law school, and maybe folks who are listening in have had the same experience. When I was in law school, we had maybe 400 students that showed up to a sports entertainment law society event. It may have just been sports law, but there was other entertainment folks that were there. And the question was asked, who wants to be the next Jerry Maguire? And everybody in the class raised their hand, or in the society raised their hand. That's me. By the time I graduated 3 years later, I was the only person pursuing a career in sports and entertainment. There were some colleagues that went off and went to work for Netflix and other companies, but I was the only one opening my own practice in that regard, and the only one that was pursuing sports and entertainment. On one hand, it said I was a little bit crazy, right, for doing that. But on the other hand, it shows that uh, sports entertainment is all about timing and it's all about sticking to you wanting to get into it.
Yeah, and thank you for that. We are at time, but I wanted to say, like what you said, is perfect because you have to do the work. right? If you rely on anything such as AI too much, you're going to be exactly like everyone else who's relying on AI too much and not really go anywhere. So I appreciate that. Jeremy, thank you so much. There's people here that probably will reach out to you afterwards. I think it's easy to get your contact information. I just put a link in the chat that I believe should lead you to our schedule for the rest of the day and tomorrow. So, and we'll stick around until Kinjo kicks us out, right? So thank you
Awesome.
I
so
will
very
do it
much.
now. Thank you, everyone, and we will have our next session 10 minutes later. Have a
Thank you
break.
so much.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks,
Bye.
Jeremy. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Appreciate you. You too.